Introduction. Certainty is an absurdity. Voltaire. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of peace, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. Amendment 1 to the Constitution of the United States. Freedom of speech is not important because making sounds with your mouth is of any significance. Those who authored the First Amendment were not concerned with preserving the right of the people to project vibrations from their vocal cords, which would then reach the inner ear membranes of the listener. Likewise, freedom of expression is not important simply because we have a deep appreciation for the arts. No, the common denominator within the First Amendment is recognizing the immense value in questioning the way things are done. Question rules, question values, question your government, question your religion, question things not for the sake of being a contrarian, and not out of complete disregard for truth. Rather, question things to find truth. A society that discourages the practice of asking questions is surely on its way to destruction, if not already there. At one time, I recognized that many of the large-scale problems of our own making that have emerged throughout human history were in some way connected to tribalism. But more specifically, these problems arise when we don't develop our ability to question things within the tribe. Exercising any of the rights listed in the First Amendment involves questioning the way something is done and exploring other ways. This becomes more apparent if we imagine a society that is absent of the rights listed within the First Amendment. Throughout history, there have been many national governments that have not given their citizens the freedom to choose a religion or even freedom to choose no religion at all. At the time of this writing, countries like Russia, North Korea, Iran, China, and countless more still operate without the freedom of the press. Now, I know what you're thinking, but the press in the United States is manipulated, and that's true. However, we have our choice of crap. Whereas many countries in the world have state-run media provide the masses with one narrative, depriving citizens of the opportunity to hear multiple sides of each story, which would allow people to form their own opinions. Ideally, when citizens have their rights preserved in the First Amendment and don't like the job their government is doing, they may say so in a speech. If citizens believe that their message would be better understood or live longer expressed through music or another form of art, they can make that art. They can make that expression. And it isn't likely that they will go to jail for it. That was at least the intention the authors of the First Amendment had. And in what manner did the authors of the United States Constitution imagine the people would exercise their right to make their opinions known? Through assembly. Therefore, they preserved the right to assemble. This allowed the ability to have forums available for discussion. Keep in mind, when the First Amendment was written, there was no internet, television, radio, or text messaging. Back then, physically assembling and the printing press were there, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram all rolled into one. So, what would ensure the people living in the year 1787 would be permitted the ability to get their point across, the right to assemble, make speeches, and the printed word were essential for this purpose. Therefore, the ability to question things in a society is an exercise of freedom. Not understanding this principle is why people can be confused about the United States being notorious for freedom, even though Americans can't do anything they want, such as drive 200 miles an hour on any public highway, or play music as loud as they want, any place they want, at any time of day, because these actions have the potential to encroach on someone else's freedom and miss the principles attached to freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to change our minds, and the freedom to change other people's minds. And a change in belief and mindset has the greatest impact on a society. Therefore, it is the greatest exercise of freedom. As citizens in the United States, questioning things is our first right. As humans, it is our most powerful ability, because questioning things is what initiates improvement. Trial by fire. As my mom dropped me off for my first day of high school, she said, "I'm going to tell you what I told your brother Jeremy his first day of high school. Ask questions. Not bad advice in hindsight, although neither of us at the time understood just how far a person could take that advice in life. If I had to guess, I think she probably just meant that we should never refrain from asking a question simply because we're afraid of people's reaction to our question. Will they think I'm stupid? Did they already address the answer to my question, but I wasn't paying attention? Will the teacher not like me if I ask? In general, fear shouldn't be the deciding factor in our decision-making process, and asking questions need not elicit fear. Some say there are no stupid questions. Still, for quite a while I believed that the only stupid question a person could ask was one that they already knew the answer to. However, there's a useful caveat here. Oftentimes, epiphanies come to us immediately as we ask a question to which we already know the answer, and in cases when the answer is obvious. All we needed was to ask this question out loud or to others in order to have worked out the answer in our heads. But who knows how much time we may have wasted in ignorance had we not asked the question audibly. Therefore, asking this stupid question was not in vain if it nonetheless resulted in a learning experience. Now, before we continue, during my time as a language teacher, we typically began most courses with a definition of terms. In fact, many college courses begin with a definition of terms. It seems responsible to do the same here. Therefore, Chapter 1, as you will find, begins with defining the word karma. Many debates I have listened to over the years involve two people who unknowingly agree on certain fundamentals, but are distracted by arguing over the vocabulary. That's what we want to avoid. Additionally, throughout this book, we will try to avoid the use of technical jargon, in the hopes of avoiding unnecessary distractions. This also serves the purpose of assuming nothing on the part of the reader and forces me to explain everything as best I can. When giving a lecture, I would often paraphrase. I'd intentionally say the same thing twice, but in a different way in order to drive home the concept and just to provide another opportunity to understand for others. Case in point, throughout this book you may notice that I do the same thing when I write. As a teacher, I believed it to be my fault when students struggled to understand material I was teaching. Students are going to ask stupid questions. The process of teaching is figuring out how to put new information into minds that are naturally resistant to change. Still, teachers are not always to blame. After all, it's impossible to predict the minds of all people or to address every learning style in every lesson. Not to mention some students are in fact at fault for simply not paying attention. Then there are those who actively and aggressively resist change. You could say that we all initially resist change. However, some are more aggressive than others. These students are not ready to learn through any style and must be primed prior to being taught. Whether we realize it or not, that's one of the reasons that arrogance is a problem at all. And it's why we find arrogant people to be so annoying. Humans have a natural tendency to appreciate the concept of learning, while viewing arrogance as a negative characteristic because it shows that one is not ready for learning, and one who is unwilling to learn makes them a rather frustrating person to be around. One might ask, in addition to teachers just giving information, can't they become more skilled in methods for priming student minds? The short answer is yes. In fact, priming is what we're engaging in right now. Practicing our ability to question things is essential in our ability to learn, maintain healthy communities and relationships, innovate, and so much more. Keeping an open mind is a skill. In developing this skill, we learn that life is merely a process of sharing ideas. Life should not include criticism, choosing sides, or an effort to be right. Take on the permanent role and mindset of a learner, and you won't need to fear the embarrassment that comes with being wrong. All throughout history, we've had the tendency to believe that our ability to question things is better than it truly is. A professor by the name Robert George was said to have conducted thought experiments with his students, which involved asking them the question, if you lived in Alabama in 1861, how many of you would be in favor of abolishing slavery? And of course, everyone raises their hand. You can run a similar experiment amongst your friends by asking 10 of them, if you lived in Nazi Germany in, say, 1939, would you be openly against the actions of the Nazi Party? Again, of course, something close to 100% of the people you ask that question will believe themselves to be smart enough to question the actions of their government at that time. The reality is, of course, when there are very compelling arguments in favor of carrying out actions which are questionable, It is impossible that 100% of the population would be against those ideas. Consider the many research studies that have been conducted to make sense of how so many people in Germany were able to go along with the narrative that was fed to them by the Nazis. However, the more sensible question to be asking is not, how is it that so many people could sign off on what the Nazis were doing? The question we ought to be asking is, how is it that I signed off on what the Nazis were doing? How is it that I was capable of falling for propaganda in some way? Within all of our lifetimes, we've all fallen victim to propaganda of some sort. At the time that the Nazi Socialist Party first came into power, they were not viewed as we view them today. Radical left-wing or radical right-wing extremists. However, now, just the mere word Nazi elicits harsh feelings within us. But again, at one time, that was not the case. The word Nazi was relatively new to many people's ears, and the government in Germany was thought of as just the government. It was not viewed as the Nazi government, and many people in Germany failed to question the agendas, mandates, and restrictions on a scale large enough to prevent what was to come, as so many of us in so many countries have done and will continue to do. In order to understand the importance of questioning things, all one needs to do is study the horrors that emerge when people fail to fulfill their societal duty to question things. Just think of the number of cults that have accrued a following, and the mass suicides and sexual assaults that have taken place within them. Questioning things is an indication that you're primed for learning. By questioning things, you either reinforce existing ideas or form new ones. Either way, you win as you become more accurate, fine-tuning the skill craft of thinking, because thinking is, indeed, a skill that requires practice. As you become better at thinking, you'll be better at differentiating emotions from thoughts. Understand that feelings should be factored into any equation, but emotions should never cause us to overlook information and guide us to an answer. Indeed, both thinking and feeling are two important factors, but we must be able to differentiate the two. Practice thinking. Practice thinking in politics, religion, relationships, and in all matters in life. This book aims to challenge the way we were told to think, and that notion is incredibly uncomfortable to many of us. But rather than becoming upset, if we stop and think, this creates new neural pathways that make dealing with the same situation easier in the future. Practice pushing through the desire to take the easier path, interrupting others, slamming our fists, raising our voices. The desires we have to deal with the problems using our emotions rather than sober-minded judgment are all forms of neuro-laziness. Understand that aggression, frustration, and similar emotions are not us dealing with problems. That is us avoiding problems. Some emotions are just the path of least resistance. Slamming our fist on the table, for example, is not us dealing with problems. It's the body avoiding the fatigue and discomfort it knows the mind will experience if we force ourselves to think through a situation. The process of thinking through matters is uncomfortable. The more unpracticed we are at thinking through problems, the more uncomfortable it will be. On the bright side, neuroscience has proven that the more experience we have in dealing with uncomfortable thoughts, the easier it becomes.